So hello and welcome everybody to Noble Desktop's live stream today for creative effects in Adobe Illustrator. My name is Dan Rodney. I'm a course developer and instructor at Noble Desktop, and I do all sorts of things with graphics from web to print, photo retouching, all sorts of different things. And today we're going to be focusing on Adobe Illustrator. And we're going to be doing a particular project in this live stream. And the instructions for that are going to be written down as step-by-step instructions, and I'll give you a link to that in just a moment. But for those of you who aren't familiar with Noble Desktop, let me just do a quick little intro before we get started, and then we'll get into today's topic. Noble Desktop is an Adobe authorized training center based in New York City. We've been around for 27 years. I've personally been teaching there for 17 years, and we hold in-person classes as well as a lot of our classes can be live streamed as well. So if you want to live stream attend those classes, you can do that, and basically you kind of screen share into the instructor's computer, hear them speaking like you're hearing me talking, and you can attend virtually for most of the classes that are on our website. So you can attend in person in New York City, which is where we're located. That's where I am right now. And you can also attend online. In addition to our classes, we have great step-by-step workbooks that you can also learn through. They're available as print and ebooks on our website as well. So that's just a little bit about us, and now on to today's topic. I'm going to be showing this in Adobe Illustrator CC 2017, just because that's the current version, but the concepts that I'm showing have been around for quite some time. We've been doing this particular seminar for numerous versions of Illustrator, so the concepts that I'm teaching should work in any somewhat recent version of Illustrator. So going back to CS5, CS6, these same concepts are still going to work. So even though I'm demonstrating in CC 2017, you can still do this in older versions of Illustrator. And it doesn't matter whether you're on a Mac or a PC, everything will be the same essentially. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my screen share and get started here. All right, so just the first thing you should know is that we have a special goodies page, and for those of you who are attending live on the stream, I'm pasting it into the chat for you, but also this is in the video description down below the video as well. And if you're watching the recording, click that link in the video description down below the video. But it's nobledesktop.com/goodies. And this is a special secret page. There's no link to this on our website. You have to know this address to get to this page. And this is where we put special little goodies for things like these online seminars that we offer. And today we're doing creative effects with Illustrator. And so here you'll find the PDF instructions for CC 2017 or CS6. And if you're using something older than CS6, like CS5, these instructions should still work fine. These are the class files here for CC 2017, and I think they also would work with CC 2015 as well, so you should be able to download these instructions in these class files. And this class file is good if you're using CS6. I believe it also would open up in older versions as well, I think, but I'm not entirely sure based on my memory. So just download the appropriate instructions, and you'll be able to follow along step-by-step instructions for everything that I'm going to show in today's seminar. Just so you can see, this is the instructions. It's literally step-by-step, tells you how to go through everything that I'm talking through today. So you can watch this video, just sit back and relax. You don't have to worry about writing notes, because literally every thing that I'm going to show today is all written down here. And you can print this out, or if you want to put it on screen and follow it along, you can do that when you're actually practicing this. But during the live stream, you can just sit back and just concentrate on what I'm trying to show. And I'm going to show you a bunch of cool things in Illustrator. I am assuming that you've opened up Illustrator and done some work in it before, that this isn't going to be your very first thing that you're doing in Illustrator. But I'm not assuming that you're expert level or anything like that. So, all right, let's go to it. All right, now, I already have a file that we're going to work with, just a starter file, so I'm going to open that up. It's on my desktop. These are the class files that you can download from our website, and we have the finished version. Let's take a look at the finished version. This is what we're going to end up creating by the end of this seminar. In here, we've got a couple things going on that are important to understand. Let's open up a couple images here so you can understand what we've done to them in Illustrator. So we've got some photographs in here that are starting out as being colored photographs. So we've got a sky and a wave photograph. Now if we pop back over to Illustrator, back in Illustrator here, the sky is green, the waves are blue, so they're not the full color photographs that they started out being. And we're not going to do anything in Photoshop to create this illustration. We're going to do all the colorization, all the work, everything here in Illustrator. And that's going to give us the flexibility that if we want to change the colors throughout our design, we can globally change them throughout the entire file, and it will update the photograph so we don't have to bounce back over to Photoshop and try to match the color in Photoshop to the color that we have in Illustrator. We'll do everything here in Illustrator. So we're going to be combining pixel-based graphics like these photographs as well as vector-based stuff and creating kind of a unified color scheme and learning all sorts of cool tips and tricks and effects that you can do along the way. So even if the final result doesn't look that amazing, you're going to learn a lot of really cool things along the way that you can use in your work that you're doing. So let's get started with the beginner file here. We had a question in the chat. Do you need to bring the photos from Photoshop to Illustrator in Cmyk? In this case, they are Cmyk, but they could also be. I think they could also probably be RGB, and I think that Illustrator would convert them. I believe so, but we have them as Cmyk in this case. And they could be TIFF files, they could be Photoshop files. It doesn't really matter the format. But generally this is a print graphic, so we would want to do something high resolution as a TIFF or a Photoshop file. These images that we provided aren't very high resolution, just so that they were a faster download, but in your work you'd want to work with something higher resolution. This is just for this demo. It's good enough to get the idea of how it works. Okay, so here we have a page, and on it we have some things already set up. First of all, we've got some layers set up here, some of which are hidden because we'll have some things that we want to show later on, but we didn't want to clutter up the design. And we just kind of organize things like the little line around the globe itself, the swoops, as we're calling them, these little things that go across, swooshes or swoops. And some of the stuff we'll do later on. There's just a layer that we have ready for something. And then the background. So we got this background color, and we don't want it to look like this. This is just temporary, so you can see that there's a shape there, and we just drew a rectangle there. The first thing I want to do is, in our exercise, we're assuming you're working in points, so I want to switch over to points. Now, to quickly switch over to points, you can go to your rulers, and you can right-click or control-click on your rulers and switch to points that way. And now your document measurements are in points. You can also do this in the menu up here if you want to switch to I think it's document setup. Yep, document setup. You can switch to your preferred measurement system there as well in document setup. But if you don't remember where that is, or you just want a faster way to do it, this is a little tip. This doesn't happen to be in the exercise, just so you know. But just I'm throwing this little tip out there that you can just control click or right click and switch between these. Control click would be on the Mac, and right click would be on Mac or PC. So, and you can go to either ruler, doesn't matter which one, and switch to points. That works in pretty much all the Adobe apps, just so you know. It's a cool little trick. All right. Now, the first thing I want to do is we want to create a color scheme that we use throughout this design. We're going to use a lot of green, and we're going to use a little bit of blue, but I want to reuse the same color over and over. And if I decide to change that color, I want to make sure that I can change it globally throughout my design. I want to create a green, and so I'm not just going to manually mix up a green in the color panel. I'm going to create a swatch because swatches can be global. If you're used to working in Adobe InDesign, InDesign forces you to create global color swatches. Global color swatches in Illustrator are optional. You don't have to create global color swatches, but we want to. Now, in fact, there's a bunch of pre-made swatches in here that are kind of cluttering up my file. I want to just get rid of those. So I'm going to keep my file clean by going into the panel menu here, selecting all the unused colors, which is basically all of them, and hitting the trash can to get rid of those. Yes, I want to do that. So you're you'll always have to have the basics: none, registration, white and black. You always have to have those in your files, but you don't have to have anything else. Now I want to create a green color swatch. And like I said, in this particular case, we're doing this for print. So we're going to be working in Cmyk. But if you're doing this for the web, you could work in RGB, and that would be fine too. I'm going to go into that panel menu and choose New Swatch. And I'm going to call this green. Actually, this is for the earth, right? So we got the earth green, and we're going to have like the waves blue. This is going to be a process color. Basically, it's not going to be a spot color like a Pantone color. We're doing a process. We're doing Cmyk because we're doing this for print. But like I said, you could do RGB if you're doing this for web. And I do not want to add this to my Creative Cloud library. I don't need to reuse this in other documents. I just want to use this in this current document, so I don't want to add that to that library. I'm just going to be adding this new swatch to my swatches panel in this particular document. And the color that I want is 45 cyan, 10 magenta, 56 yellow, and 0 black. It's just a color that I mixed up ahead of time and wrote down. This is in the exercise, but it's just a nice color, green, that we want to use throughout our design. So global is the important thing that I want to check on here, because global means that you can globally update this throughout your entire document whenever you use this color swatch. If I don't have global on, then it will not let me globally change this throughout my document, meaning I'm going to have to go and manually change every place that I use this color. Now, let me create this first without global checked on, just so you can see. I'm going to click OK. Notice that the swatch just looks like a color indicator, and I can make this a little bit bigger by going into the, let's go into a large thumbnail view, just so you guys can see this a bit better. All right, now if I use this in multiple places, if I ever edit that color again, because I didn't check global, these colors are all separate and they're unrelated to each other, and I can't globally update them all. So for example, if I go and I make this a different color and I check on preview, notice that nothing happens in my document because it wasn't a global color. I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to double click to go back into the swatch, and now I'm going to make it global. Now you want to do that before you ever create any of your elements, because this doesn't go back and fix the ones that I already made. Those are just individual greens that are unrelated to this global color swatch. So I'm going to check on global. First of all, you'll notice that now there's a little white corner in this thumbnail. This triangle of white indicates that it's global, and that means that it will update throughout my file. Now when I come here and I look in my color panel, notice that this is just made of the Cmyk breakdown. It's not linked to my swatch. When you apply your swatch, you'll see that it's linked to that swatch, that global color swatch, because it will say the name of the swatch, and you'll see T, which is for tint. And that can make a lighter version of that particular color if you want to tint it back and use something that's not quite as intense, it's not as bright. So if you tint it all the way back, it's going to get you white, but I want to be full on green here. So notice again, this one is not linked to the swatch. So to do this properly, you want to create the swatch as global right from the very beginning before you ever apply it to any of your elements. Now that I've actually applied that swatch to all of these different elements, and they're actually linked to it, even if nothing is selected, I can go and double click on my swatch, check on preview, and I can update them all throughout the entire document. And it doesn't matter whether you have used these on strokes or fills or anywhere in your document, they will change every place you've used this particular color everywhere throughout the entire document. So this is how colors work in Adobe InDesign. By default, in InDesign you can't create a swatch that's not global. It doesn't let you. In Illustrator you can. You can create regular swatches or global swatches. But if you ever plan on making updates, make sure you create them as global before you use them. Okay. So I want to use it on this color, so I'm going to apply that. I also want to use it on these elements. So I'm going to click on one, shift click on another, so both are selected. And I'm going to again click on that color. Now to separate these swoops or swooshes, whatever you want to call them, we're calling them swoops in this particular exercise. I don't want to have a border. I'm going to come here to my appearance panel. Let's make these other panels a little bit smaller. The appearance panel is the place where you can do all sorts of interesting things. When you think about strokes and fills, if you just think of a single stroke and a single fill per object, you're limiting what Illustrator can do. Over here in the Tools panel, we see a fill and a stroke, but that's not all that Illustrator can do. Illustrator can do multiple fills and multiple strokes and multiple effects on different parts of your object. And that concept can't be done using the simple fill and stroke that you have over here. You need to use the appearance panel to unlock the full potential of your styling that you do on objects. And we're going to explore that today. If you're not using the appearance panel, you are missing out on one of the best features of Adobe Illustrator. There's tons of stuff that you can only do using the appearance panel. It's one of my favorite features that have ever been added to Adobe Illustrator, and there's a ton of power that you can do only in the appearance panel. So I'm going to go here to stroke, and I want to get rid of the stroke. And here's the interesting thing. Instead of having to pop back and forth between different panels, like the color panel to do the color and the stroke panel to do the weight and all these different panels, you can go in here and the appearance panel can show you all of those other different panels. If I go to fill and I click on the fill, I can choose a swatch. If I go to the stroke and I click on that, I can choose a swatch for that. I can change the thickness of the stroke. If I want to change the aspects of the stroke, I can click on the word stroke to pop open the stroke panel. So I don't have to go to all these different panels and have a bunch of things open. If you were only going to have one panel open in Illustrator, the one that would be the most useful almost would be the appearance panel, because you can do so much in that single appearance panel. Now I actually want to just get rid of the stroke because I don't want it, so I'll click on that and choose none. So I have no stroke. I want to add an effect, which you can also do in the appearance panel. There's an effect down here that you can click on, this little effects button. That's the same thing as going up here into the effects menu. This menu here is exactly the same thing here as going into this effects button down there. You just don't have to travel your mouse as far if you're already in the appearance panel. Now, in here, if you go to stylize, notice that there are two different stylize sections. There's the Illustrator effects stylize, and then there's the Photoshop effects stylize. The Photoshop effects are pixel-based effects, whereas the Illustrator effects are vector-based effects. So kind of keep that in mind a little bit here. Under stylize, I'm going to do a glow, an outer glow, and that's what's going to kind of define the shape of these in a very subtle way. My outer glow right now is based on a dark color, which I don't want. I'm going to click on that color box right there and change this to a light color, like white. And I want this to be more apparent, so I'm going to go up to 100%. I'm going to check on preview so I can see this. Now I can actually see it, and we see that it's very small. I'm going to bump up the blur amount so we can make it bigger, so you can see it in a more in a bigger area. All right, so I like that. I'm going to click OK, and that glow has been added as an effect, a live effect that's editable. So if you ever come back in later and you want to edit that, you can select these two shapes again, click on one, shift click on another, and if you want to change it, you just click on the name, and you can change any of the settings. You know, if you think it needs to be bigger, you can make it even bigger. If you think it needs to be smaller, you can make it smaller. If you're just not sure and you want to see what it looks like without it, you can hit the eyeball to toggle it off and back on. And if you really don't like it, you can drag it to the trash, and then you've gotten rid of it. All the effects that you're adding in here are non-destructive, and they're editable the whole time. So that's one of the great things about those. And we'll be doing more with effects. Just one thing that you have to be very careful about that has messed me up a bunch of times and sometimes has messed up people that I'm teaching. When you deselect your objects, you still see the last appearance that you played around with. So if you select an object, it kind of loads that appearance into the appearance panel. And notice that when I have a thing selected, it tells me the name of that thing at the top of this panel. But if I click off, now it says no selection, but it still shows the previous appearance. If I click on this, for example, which didn't have an effect, now that path is selected, but when I click off, now it says no selection, but it still has that same appearance. If I click on this one, and then I deselect, so it loads up that last appearance, probably because maybe you could save it as a style or do something with it, but I really, in my opinion, I wish that this panel would just blank out when nothing was selected, that they wouldn't show anything like this in a way, because you have to be careful. If nothing is selected and you go and you think you're making an edit to something, first of all, your clue here is that preview's not checked. And so you can't preview something that's being applied nothing. Nothing is getting this formatting. You're just playing with stuff that's not affecting anything. So, but you're doing this and you're thinking, hey, why am I not seeing anything change? And then you realize, oh, wait, I was doing it on nothing. There's nothing selected. I'm not changing anything at all. So just be careful of that. You might have thought you had something selected because you see the appearance that you want to edit, but always check that top little line there and make sure that it says something. It shouldn't say no selection. It should say path or text or something like that. Okay, so just be careful of that. That's gotten me a couple times, and I know it's gotten a bunch of people that I've taught as well. So just be careful of that. Alrighty, next, let's keep working with this appearance panel. We want to do a really cool thing here to this thing that's orbiting the globe. So we drew this line, and that line is meant to be an arrow, kind of looking like it's circling the globe, going around there. And for that, we want to make kind of an interesting line with an arrowhead at the end of it, and we want to have kind of a double stroke, one that is like a thick stroke that's solid, and then another thinner stroke, which is dashed or dotted on top of that. So we're going to learn a bunch of cool things here. But because this is orbiting the Earth, we want to use a blue that we're going to use elsewhere in our document. So like we created a global color swatch for the green, we are going to go create another global color swatch for the blue that we want to create. I'm going to go back into this Swatches panel menu here and say New Swatch. And I'm going to call this the Waves Blue. Again, I have to make sure it's global before I use it. I don't want to add it to my Creative Cloud library to share with other documents. I only need this in this particular file. And the blue that I'm working with is going to be 80, 35, and then everything else is 0. So that's the blue that we want to work with. Okay. And now you see once again that both of these have that little white triangle at the bottom right corner indicating that those are global color swatches. Now this particular stroke is quite thin. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see this a bit better. I want to make it thicker. And once again, we could do this all in the appearance panel. I can go and click on the weight, and then I can bump that up, make that thicker. And the cool thing about the appearance panel is that you're not just limited to one stroke and one fill per object. I have a single stroke right now, but I want to add a second stroke on top, one that's a little bit lighter and that's dashed or dotted. So I'm going to zoom in one more time here so we can really see this nice and big. To add a stroke, let's say you want to select this one and kind of duplicate it, there's a couple ways you can do it. Down here, the duplicate selected items would let you select something and duplicate your selection. So you could certainly click on that stroke and duplicate that stroke so you have a second copy of that stroke. Let me delete that one. The other thing you can also do is just come over here and there's an add new stroke and an add new fill that you can also do. And in that case, it's actually just adding another duplicate stroke of the same kind. But that way you don't have to worry about what's selected. You know you're going to get a stroke regardless of what is selected. All right, now we have one stroke on top of another. And kind of like our layers, whatever's on top is in front of the other elements. So in this case, background is on the bottom because it's behind everything. The same thing happens with the appearance panel. The stroke that's on top is physically in front. It's closer to you than the ones that are down below in the appearance panel. This is the one that I want to make lighter and smaller. Right now it's the same color. Let's just say for a moment that I switch over to green. Now you don't see the blue stroke that's underneath because this green stroke is the same thickness as the blue one underneath. But if I make this smaller, now we have a small thing sitting on top of a bigger thing, so that bigger thing is poking out from behind. If I put this small thing underneath the big stroke, now we can't see it because this bigger stroke is hiding completely this small thing that's behind it. So yes, you can drag to rearrange your strokes. Now I don't actually want to choose this green, I want to choose the blue, but I want to choose a lighter version of the blue. Now up here in the color panel, you can do tinting here. But I want to try to do as much as I can through the appearance panel just to show you that you can do this in the appearance panel. So while we could do it there, When you click on this, it brings up the color swatches panel. But if I mouse over that and wait for the tooltip, it says hold shift to bring up the alternate color UI. Now UI is an abbreviation for user interface. They probably should have said hold shift to bring up the color picker, right? So if I hold shift and I click, now I get the color picker. If I don't hold shift, I get the swatches panel. So I'm going to shift click to get the color panel, and then I can reduce the tint and I can get a lighter version of the blue without even having to go to the color panel. Okay, I'm going to make that a little bit thinner like so. So now I have two strokes applied to the same object. And the nice thing about having two strokes on the same object is that if you go to your direct selection tool and you try to reshape that path, both strokes are going to update. And that's the thing, that you cannot do multiple strokes like this in any other way. You have to do it using the appearance panel. It used to be that people would do this by copying and pasting multiple copies on top. They would select an object, they would copy it, and they would say paste in front. And then the problem with that is you have two different objects, and if you ever want to change the shape of one, you also have to do the same thing to the other, and that makes editing tedious. Don't do it as multiple objects. Do it as a single object with multiple strokes attached. Definitely the way to do it. Now, I want to make this stroke, this light blue stroke on top, I want to make it dotted or dashed. So I'm going to click on the word stroke to pop open the stroke panel. I can go here to the dashed option, and I can check on that. And now notice what you're doing, what you're seeing here is every 12 points, we're having a dash. And then because it says 12 points and there's no specified gap, it assumes the same gap size as the dash size. So it's doing 12 points of dash and 12 points of gap, and then 12 points of dash, and then 12 points of gap. It just keeps repeating that over and over again. I can come in and specify a gap size if I want. Maybe I want to do 4 points. If I hit return like that, it actually dismisses that panel. What's probably better instead of hitting return is to hit tab to enter it in and make that value apply without closing that panel. Now notice that I have 12 points of dash and only 4 points of gap in between. If you want to preview this live, you can click into one of these fields. And in most Adobe apps, you can use your up and down arrow keys to increase or decrease that value and have a live preview. So I'm going to hit my down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, and you can see that gap amount decreasing as you're going through. So up arrow, up arrow, up arrow, the gaps keep getting bigger. I could do the same thing with the dashes. I can hit my down arrow to make the dashes smaller. I can make the gap even bigger. So now I have just a little bit of 3-point dash and a big 10-point gap. So you can totally customize that. If you want, let's say I do 10 and then 2, and then I do 2 and 2. So now I have a repeating section of like a double dash. So I have a big dash and then a little one, and that section repeats. So I have this big dash, a little bit of space, and then a little dash and the same amount of space. Now, if I wanted to, I could make these amounts of spaces different. So it does 10 points of dash, and then, yeah, actually in this case, I'm going this direction. So it's doing 10 points of dash, 2 points of gap, 2 points of dash, and then 1 point of gap, and then the whole thing repeats again. You do always have to pay attention to which direction your line is going, depending on which way you drew it. And I drew it from right to left. So we're seeing actually the end of that. And the start actually is over here. That's the start of it. Okay. So now, just as a little tip here, notice that it doesn't say dotted line. There's no dotted option. And so this isn't in the exercise, the handout. But just want to throw it out there that if you want to make a dotted line, here's how you do it in Illustrator. It should be easier. There should just be like a dotted option if there's a dashed option. But the way that you do it is you want to have some space between things. And the dash, okay, so when you have a dash, that's how long the dash is. Let's say we will go up here to cap. And right now we have the butt cap, we have a rounded cap, and we have a projecting cap. Now the round cap will stick rounded ends on the end, the start and the end of this little dashed part. So if I throw on that round cap, it adds that rounding, but there's still 10 points of dash in between those caps. Well, what would happen if you end up reducing that dash? Eventually, as you get smaller and smaller, there's less and less dash. Now, even when you get to 1 point, there's still 1 point of dash, and that's still a little bit of thickness that it's not a complete perfect circle. Well, you can actually get to 0 dash, and then you have 0 length of dash, but you still have the end caps. You still have the start cap and the end cap, which means you have a perfect circle. So in here, you really just want to do a 0 dash, and then whatever gap amount you want for the spacing of your dotted line. So if you ever want to do a dotted line, that's how you do it in Illustrator. It's a little trickier than I think it should be, not as intuitive, not necessarily hard once you know how to do it, but just kind of unintuitive. And that's what I do find a lot with Illustrator, is that lots of things aren't necessarily hard, but sometimes they're a bit unintuitive, that you might not just be able to figure it out on your own. But once you know, oh, maybe that's not too hard to do. Maybe just unintuitive to guess how that works. Now, I don't want that kind of line. I actually want a squared dotted line. So I actually like the 10, maybe like 10 and 3, something like that. That's what I'm looking for here. Okay. Now, I want to add an arrow on the end of this line. And Illustrator can add arrows. It used to be that you'd have to do an effect, and there was an add arrowhead effect. But now they built that effect directly right into the stroke itself. Now we have to choose which stroke we're adding this to. I actually just want to add it to the dark blue that's underneath. I don't want the light blue because that won't look good on the green background. So I'm going to go to the dark blue stroke here. And I'm going to add my arrowhead this way. And whichever one you do it on, remember how I talked about the start versus the end? So this one is the start, and this one is the end. Now, as we just had figured out, this is the end over here, so that's why I'm going to go to this one. But if you guessed wrong, there's a swap option. So if you ever guess wrong, you could do the swap. So we just go in here, and there's a bunch of different arrows that you can choose from. And once you choose the arrow, then you can change the size if you want to scale it proportionally compared to your path. So you can do that. And like I said, if you want to switch it, if you hit this button, that will swap to the other side. And if you ever put it on the wrong side, you can swap it. Just go in there and hit the swap button. Goes to the other side. Okay. Right now, the tip of the arrow is hitting the tip of my stroke, which actually in this case doesn't look good. Just zoomed in there and scrolled over here. It doesn't look good because my dashed line is extending beyond that. So what I can do is I can change the alignment, and instead of the arrow tip being the end of the path, I can have it project beyond. So it kind of starts at the end of the path instead of ending at the end of the path. So that's better. That's what I want in this case. Now for the other side, let's go back over here on the other side. Just to round this out, I think I like a rounded cap just because that looks a little bit nicer on that end. And now I have a nice little stroke that is a single object. Even though it has 2 strokes, I can go in and I can tweak this path, and the arrowhead is applied to the end. It points in whichever direction my line points. I don't need 2 different objects to do that, or multiple objects to do that. I can do that all within a single path. I was just hitting my keystroke for undoing those because I didn't want to do those changes. All right, cool. So that's what I wanted to do to that stroke. Next, actually, let's zoom back in again there on the globe. Next up, we want to add some type. Type along the top here saying Earth Conference, because that's the kind of goal of this particular, the theme of this particular project that we're doing. And for that, I have a line that I want to do, and I have that already drawn. While we were drawing the globe, we just made another circle right around it, and we hit it on a layer called Title. So we're just going to show that layer just to make it easier so you don't have to draw a circle. That way we can focus on the fun stuff instead of boring stuff like drawing a circle. I want to add type along this path. So I can go to my Type on a Path tool, just clicking and holding on this tool. Come here. And I mouse over, and when it says path on the tooltip there, I just want to make sure that I aim, and I'm kind of aiming with the cross beam of this tool. So there's a kind of cross beam at the very bottom of the cursor. You want to line that up with the circle. I'm going to click. In the latest versions of Illustrator, they throw in some lorem ipsum for you. In older versions, they don't. They just have the blinking cursor there. It doesn't matter. We're just still going to just type in Earth Conference. The pink highlight means missing font, which is okay because I don't want to use this font anyway. I'm going to come in here, and I want, in this case, Arial Black. We just chose Arial Black because it's a thick typeface, and we were pretty sure that everybody would have that on their computer. The reason we want a thick typeface is because we're going to experiment with some effects that require some thickness to your type. So I'm going to make this a bit bigger here, and I want to center this where I clicked. So I'm going to click the center button, and it goes down to the bottom. Now, it used to be in Illustrator that when you did type on a path, wherever you clicked was kind of your anchor point. And it would always left align or center align to the point you clicked on, which in my opinion was the best way. I really liked how Illustrator used to do type on a path better than the way that Illustrator currently does type on a path. And type on a path can be a little bit buggy in Illustrator, and we're going to see that probably in just a moment. But there is a rhyme and a reason to this. Illustrator did this for a reason. So what's the reason? Well, because where you clicked was the start of the type. And then type can go all the way around to the end. So because we're on a circle, we can start and end, and we can put type anywhere along that circle. But because I started there, if I left align, it goes to the start point. If I right align, it goes to the end point. And if I go to center, it goes to the midpoint halfway in between the start and the end. So since I clicked there and I said to start there, halfway between the start and the end would be the bottom middle. So that's why they did it. It's not what I want, but that's why they did it that way. You can grab this line right here, and you can drag that to move the type along the path. Now, as you're dragging, type on a path can freak out a bit. Like, you see how it's jumping down there, but my cursor's up here? Just drag around a little bit. Sometimes I find that dragging inside or outside, is definitely going to make a difference, but just drag around a little bit until it kind of settles itself down. You're like, oh, hey, there, it's good. Let's let go. It's not you. It's just being buggy. It's been buggy for, I don't know how long. It's been buggy for years. And it's sad, but once you, see, there you go. Now just jump back down again there. Let's undo. Sometimes just dragging it around. Yeah, see it? It's just being buggy. Just kind of wiggle your cursor around until you get it to where you want it to be. All right, now I want this to be white. And so I'm going to double click on my fill color over here and choose white. There we go. Now for the cool stuff. Now we're going to do some effects on the type. We could go up to effects and do it this way, or we can go to effects in the appearance panel and do it that way. That's fine. The important thing here is I'm not going to convert to outlines. You do not have to convert to outlines to do this. You can do all of these effects on live type, which is very important so that you can change the font, you can change the type. I don't like to convert to outlines unless I absolutely have to. And it saddens me to see a lot of people, their first thing is just to go and they create outlines in Illustrator. They're like, oh, I just assumed you had to do that. And I asked them, I said, did you try to do it without creating outlines? And the problem is that Illustrator years ago was more limited, and so people got in the habit of creating outlines because Illustrator couldn't do a lot of things on live type. But Illustrator's come a long way over the years, and so now things that used to not work, now they work. So you can do effects without having to convert to outlines. So anytime you get a new version of Illustrator, if there was some limitation that a previous version of Illustrator had, if something didn't work, try it again in the new version, see if it works. And a lot of times new versions improve functionality and we can keep things live and we don't have to expand or outline things. Give it a shot and see. All right, now we're going to do a scribble effect. It's what we want to do. We want to make this kind of look like it's hand drawn a little bit, kind of scribbled in, like with a pencil or pen. So we're going to choose this effect. And there's some, well, first of all, let's just check on preview. Okay, so the initial scribble effect might be fine on artwork because you can apply this to anything, but not so good on type. On type, you really need to be kind of more accurate for you to still be able to see the type. So there's some presets up here. Childlike, well, it's like a child. They're not very accurate. Some of these presets not going to work so well. I'm just going to jump ahead to tight. Tight is much little smaller, tighter strokes, scribbles that they're making. So what they're doing here, if you look at this, first of all, there's an angle to the strokes, so you can change that. And so basically you're coming in here and kind of, it's like you're scribbling in and filling in that area. The overlap is if you want some, well, let's go to the stroke width. Let's make the stroke width, let's make it thicker. I'm going to hit my up arrow, see how it gets thicker. Or I'm going to go down to like a half point, and then it's thinner. It's going to let me show things with a thinner stroke a little bit better. So the overlap is kind of, I like to call that an offset, actually. If you think about the original path of the type, so the path is the shape that you're filling. Do you want to go outside the lines or inside the lines? Like basically, like if you're a kid and you're doing a coloring book, do you stay inside the lines? And so when you're at 0, it does not go beyond the line and it doesn't stay inside the line. It actually goes right to the line, and it's basically very accurate in tracing right up to the line itself. But if you go towards inside a little bit, then you're actually pulling inside. You're not actually going right up to the edge. You're staying a little bit inside. So you're basically making everything a little thinner. If you go outside a little bit, well, now you're going beyond the lines, and so now you can make something a bit thicker. Now there's no variation right now, so it's all done by the same amount. If you choose some variation, oh, that was a lot of variation. Probably don't want that much on this. If there's some variation, some things can be inside, some things can be outside, some things can be right to the line. It's a variable thing rather than a fixed amount. On type, I don't want to do any of this. I don't want it to come in or out. I want it to go right to the edge of my type. I don't want there to be variation on this. Now, when it comes to the width of your strokes, this is really just personal preference of how thick you want your strokes to look. Curviness depends on your feeling there. Like here, they're very loopy, and that might be good if you're doing like a cowboy thing. It depends on your shape there. And again, whenever you're doing some of these settings, there's like a variation amount where you can say, hey, some things are pointy, some things are loopy. I don't want the curviness in this case. And then there's spacing. So how far apart are things? You don't want them very far apart with type. You want to keep them very close together for type, because the closer together they are, the more solid they're going to be. Now, this is where the thickness of your stroke and your spacing are going to work together, because if your spacing is very, very tight and it's actually smaller than your stroke width, there's a lot of overlap and it kind of looks like it fills in for the most part. So let's do something that's maybe got a little bit more spacing. And if the spacing is more than your stroke, you're going to get some gaps. Again, there can be variation. And again, you don't want to do too much on type. You want to keep that pretty low, maybe like 1 or something. And that says you can vary it by like a point. So there could be no there could be, in this case, spacing is there'd be no spacing, or you can go up to a certain amount. So sometimes there's more spacing than others. And it creates a variable look to it that's not so even and predictable. Actually, don't want that in this case. I like it kind of filled in a little bit. Maybe not quite filled in that much. And again, you can change the angle and get something that you like. And you can play around with the presets if you want. In this case, we're just going to use the tight preset, but I kind of like it just a little bit thinner and a little bit tighter, like so. It's a live effect, so if I don't like it at any point, I can turn it off. I can turn it back on. I can go in and update the type. So if I needed to add 2017, I can do that. And the type gets updated. You can change the typeface. So if I don't want Arial black anymore, if I want something else, You can do any typeface that you like. The thicker typefaces are going to work better for this particular effect. But even if you don't like the scribble effect, the idea of doing this stuff to live type, that's the interesting thing here, that you can do these effects to live type. So you can try out other effects too. All right. Next effect that we're going to create. Along the middle of these swoops, we've drawn some lines. I'm going to show the layer that shows them. We don't want them to be red. We only made them red so that they would stand out. But basically, along the middles of these areas here, we want to put circles going across in this path that we've drawn. So basically like a row of circles. And we want to be able to play around with how big the circles are, how far apart the circles are, and have them nicely follow along this path. Now, if you were manually going to put those circles there, just one after another, getting them evenly spaced, just an evenly spaced set of circles along a path, if you were manually doing it, that would be pretty tedious and hard. And the problem would be that you couldn't change the spacing easily later on and change the size across all of them. So we want to make a way that we can very quickly scatter a bunch of circles along that line and be able to control the spacing and the sizing and that type of stuff along that line. And to do that, we can create a brush. There are these cool things called scatter brushes, which, you think of scattering, you think of kind of randomness, but it can be a very ordered scattering or a very random scattering. That's up to you. We're going to do something very orderly, but you could have something very playful and very random and do interesting things with scatter brushes. Just like with our swatches, there's a bunch of pre-made brushes in here. I'm going to get rid of all of them so they don't clutter up our document. So I'm going to select all the unused brushes, hit the trash can to get rid of them. There's still some brushes in here that are in there even though I've not used them. Like if you try to trash them, they can't be deleted. Just ignore them. I call them the prima donna brushes. They're like, no, I can't be deleted. I want to be here. I want you to look at me, even if you're not using me. Anyway, so we're going to create our own brushes. Now, for a scatter brush, you need art. That means I need to draw my circle. So I'm going to use my ellipse tool, click and drag a circle out, about the size that I think I'm going to use it. I have a white fill right now with no stroke. I'm going to hit the bendy arrow here to swap the fill and the stroke so that I end up having a white stroked circle. That's what I want. Okay. I'm going to make it a little thinner stroke there. Okay, so I want to take these and basically scatter them along that line. And so I just take this art and I drag it into the brushes panel. Drag and drop. Hey, why is that not working now? Drag and drop. Huh. Why is my drag and drop not working? Drag and drop. Well, I think I can also do this with the new brush button. Let's check it out. But normally, yeah. Let me just save this document and restart my Illustrator just in case. Dan Earth. Save my Illustrator file. Yep. These default options are fine. Okay, let's just quit Illustrator. Relaunch it. Unless I'm thinking of another feature that lets me drag my drag art in, but I thought it worked on brushes as well. Try it again. All right, we grab that art and drag it in. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So yeah, so you could do this either way. You can select the art and hit the new button, or you can drag it in. Not sure why it wasn't working there for a moment. Oh, you see how now it's not working again? Huh. And it's being a little buggy for some reason. Well, you saw that it worked there for a moment. I'm not going to restart Illustrator again. I'm just going to select it and hit New Brush. Either way works. And I want a scatter brush because I want to scatter this across that line. Brushes are like strokes. They're applied along a path. Here's the preview of our white circle. It's just on a white background, so you really can't see it. I'm going to call this my circle brush. We'll come back to these settings in a moment, but I need to apply this first before I can really demonstrate this. Otherwise, I'm just describing it and you can't see it. So let me apply this, and then I can come back in here and talk about these options. Okay, so now here you can see this a little bit better. Now it looks like a white circle on a gray background. I can actually delete this art. I don't need that anymore. And you apply a brush, kind of like you apply a stroke. When you apply a brush, it goes onto the stroke. So it's actually going to basically replace this red stroke with the brush when I click on it. Boom. Let's do it again. Click on this other stroke. Boom. So all you have to do is take any path that you draw and apply the brush to it. It could be straight lines. It doesn't matter. Any vector shape can have a brush applied, and it goes along that path. All right, now let's tweak this a little bit. To tweak it, you double click and you get to edit these settings. Check on preview. The size can be made smaller or bigger. Now, if you make it bigger and you keep the normal spacing, they're going to overlap, which can actually be a pretty cool thing. That could be interesting. The spacing, you can make it tighter or looser. And this is the nice thing, is that you can really play around with this. Now, the scatter is a left or right position. So you can go to the left or the right of the path. And with all these things being fixed, you might think, well, why is this really called a scatter brush? Well, the idea is that if it's randomized, for example, let's randomize all of these things. So now you have like a min and a max amount. So you can make it small sometimes and big other times. And you're kind of setting a range that it could be anywhere from 50% to 350% in size, but it'll be random. And the spacing, you can have some things be tightly spaced and some things be loosely spaced. And you're creating this kind of nice random effect. The scattering, well, if that's random, some can go to the left and some can go to the right. So it doesn't have to be exactly along your line. And you actually get some really interesting randomized things. So if you're creating bubbles, for example, let's imagine these things are bubbles or raindrops. You can have different sizes of things. You could do rotation too, which I know does not work with my circle because you can't really see a circle rotating. It looks the same no matter what the rotation is. But imagine these being different elements that could be rotated, like maybe they're bees, and you want to create a swarm of bees that are all in different, pointing in different directions and different sizes. Some are bigger and some are smaller, or whatever it is. It could be anything. So I don't want that randomness. I want the fixed amount. Actually, I'm just going to cancel that just to go back. Let's go back in. And I just want to be able to play with size and spacing. And to be able to play around with this and have it easily go along a stroke is a really cool thing about this brush. Somebody in the chat was just saying they played around. If you grab the object dead center, you can't drag and drop it into the brush panel. But if you grab it anywhere else, it lets you. Oh, that's a good tip. Thank you, Michelle, in the chat. Okay, so now I clicked OK to that, and it says, hey, how do you want me to deal with the brushes that you've, the strokes that you've already applied that brush to? So basically, do you want to change the brush for future applications and leave the ones that were there as they were, or do you want to go back and change the ones that you previously did? So I want to apply that to the previous strokes that I had done. I don't want to leave them as they used to be and only update the brush for future uses. I want to apply them to everything I've already done. Okay. All right. Yeah, and I just got to try that out. Just, yeah, if you drag the center, yeah, it does not go in. And if you grab like the edge, yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, cool. That's a great catch, Michelle. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know I could drag it in sometimes, so I was kind of curious why it didn't work from the center. I don't know if that's a feature or a bug. Probably have to ask the engineer if they intended that. I'd categorize that as a bug, personally. Okay. Now these are strokes, so if we want these to be a little bit more subtle, I'm going to go here to opacity and just pop down the opacity a little bit. They're a little bit bright for my taste. We wanted them to kind of be subtle background things, like so. Okay. So neat thing that you can do with a scatter brush. All right, so we're about halfway through with today's live stream, and we like to take a restroom break, stretch break halfway through. So I'm going to put up a 5-minute timer so that you can go grab a drink, use the restroom, and we will continue in 5 minutes. Okay, we are back. We've been doing a bunch of different vector effects now, and I want to start bringing in those pixel-based graphics and applying the same color scheme to those. For that, I want to create, basically, I want to put that onto the background layer. Yeah, we're going to put them right here. We already have a background layer with just the green on it, and so we're going to place them in on the same layer. All right, so I just select my background layer, and I can do a file place to import that. And we're going to start with the top thing, which is the clouds. Now, on the Mac, in recent versions of the Mac OS, you have to click Options to see these options. In previous versions of the Mac OS, you did not have to click that button to see these. And on Windows, they should just be visible. But that is important here to see whether this link is checked or not. If you do not check link, this graphic will be embedded, and that makes it harder to edit in Photoshop. If you ever do want to edit this in Photoshop, if you maintain that as a link, basically you could just say edit. When you make a change in Photoshop, the link will update automatically in Illustrator, and so you can make changes very easily in Photoshop. Once you have embedded it, there are ways to get it unembedded, but it's just more work, it's trickier. So if you think there's ever a chance that you're going to make edits to that Photoshop file or that TIFF file or whatever it is, once you placed it into Illustrator, if you think there's the chance, it's a good idea to link it, at least at the beginning. Eventually, if you want to create a printable file that you're going to send off to the printer, you might want to embed it, but that's easy to do at the very end if you want to make a separate version of the document which has it embedded, and I'll show you how to do that at the end when we're all done. So I'm going to maintain the link. I want to make sure that's checked because I might want to make a change later on. I'm going to place that, and I'm going to place this up here at the top left of the document. Let's close that up. All right, I'm going to just position it here so that I can see the sky above this swoop here. I'm not going to worry here that I have some extra here that I don't want. I don't want this up here. I want to crop that off. Right now I'm just focusing on getting the kind of the positioning of this rather than the cropping. Okay, so that's what I like. I think that looks good in that space. Maybe just use my arrow keys to nudge it up a little teeny bit. Now, I have some extra that I don't need. I don't need the top part, and I don't need this bottom part. And to do that, I can mask off the parts of the photo that I don't want. So there's a mask button up here that I can click. When I hit click mask, it will add a mask that I can pull in, and that will crop off the excess that I don't need. Cool. All right. Now that I've cropped that in to the part that I want, I can make the color match my background. For that, I need to go to the opacity or transparency panel, and I'm going to use blending modes. So blending modes are one of those things that if you're not used to them, they're kind of unintuitive to initially start learning how they work. And I'm not going to explain all the different blending modes and how they work. I'm going to focus on the one that we need in this case. But in general, what's the idea of a blending mode? Well, opacity is a form of blending, right? If I make this a lower opacity, I'm seeing some of the photo, and then I'm seeing through to the green background that's behind, but it is blending some of the photo and some of the background. Now, at 100%, I don't see any blending. I don't see any of the background. At 0, again, I don't have any blending. I don't see the foreground. I only see the background. And some point in between, I'm seeing a little bit of both. So I kind of want, I want the green, but I don't want any of the color. And so any form of opacity that's just an opacity, that's always going to have some of my original color that I don't want. So yeah, I kind of want to see through to the green, but the part of the photo that I want to see, I don't want any color there from the color of the photo itself. I want it to pick up on the color of the background. So I don't want that kind of blending. I want a blending mode. Now in here, they group together similar types of blends. These first set right here, and they might be a little bit hard, but there are little divider lines here. It might be a little hard for you to see, but there are divider lines here. These darken in some way. These lighten in some way. These here are related to contrast. They are kind of a combination of the first two. They lighten and darken. This is more about kind of inverting or opposites, and then color-related stuff. Ooh, color-related stuff. Well, I want to deal with color. In fact, what I want is luminosity. Now, you might think color is what you want, but that's not what you want, because that only uses the color from your current object and blends that into the background. That's not what I like about this object. What I like about this object is its luminosity. Now, luminosity comes from illumination. And if you think about illumination, you think of light and dark. And the aspect that I want to blend into the background is the luminosity. It's the illumination. And that's kind of appropriate here because it's a picture of the sun, which is an illuminator, right? So it's creating lightness and darkness. And I like the luminosity, and that's what I want to blend. I don't like anything else. So in your mind, if you think about color and luminosity, or the lightness and darkness, as two separate elements, one of which you can throw out, you can just blend the part that you like. So what we're effectively doing is, if you think about the original image, this original image has both color and luminosity changes. Like, it's not a single shade of color, because otherwise it would just be a solid block of color. There's lots of different shades in here. There's different varying luminosities. There's lights and there's darks, but there's also varying different colors. I only like the luminosity, the light and dark, and that's the aspect that I want to blend. Whereas the color threw out the luminosity and only blended the color. So these are the various different colors being blended into the background. I actually didn't like those colors. I actually wanted only the luminosity from this element, and that will blend into the background color. So the color is actually whatever you're blending into. So blend modes give you the aspects that you like of your current selection. All right. So now, if you want to further reduce the opacity of that as well, so it's not quite as dark, you can do that to kind of blend it in more. Cool. Now, this is still a link. So if I double click to go into that group, Illustrator lets you double click to go into groups. So you just double click to go into that group. I can select that image, and up here you can say edit original. And if I hit edit original, I come to my original file. And if I ever need to make changes, like let's say, for example, I add a curves adjustment and maybe I darken it up a lot, I can save that. These will be fine. When I come back to Illustrator, it says, hey, some of the files have been missing or modified. In this case, modified. Would you like to update them? Yes. And now I get the darker version of that image. You can see that better if I go back to the original full opacity, see how dark that is. So double click on your mask to go into the mask, select the photo within the mask, edit that original, make your change, whatever it is, lighten, darken it, retouch it, doesn't matter. You save your file. When you come back to Illustrator, it'll say, do you want to update? You say yes, and you get the updated document. That is made possible because we linked. If we had embedded, that same option wouldn't be there. Okay. I do want to lower the opacity on this, so we'll lower that down. All right. Let's create a blue background down here for the waves. Now, as we start to get a bunch of elements in here, as I mouse over things, it's highlighting elements. I might click on something and accidentally select some stuff that I don't want. And we created all these layers so that we could lock layers that we didn't want to work with, things that we were done, so we wouldn't accidentally edit them. Also, just in case we wanted to hide and show something, that made making different layers, having different layers makes that a bit easier. But we're nice and organized here, so let's use that organization to our advantage. I want to basically make a new layer for the blue waves, and I want to lock all the rest so that I don't accidentally work on those. So I'm going to create a new layer over the background because I want to be between the swoops and the background. So I'm going to create a new layer, which I'm going to call blue waves. And then I want to lock all the rest. So I can select this, and if I go into the menu here, I can say lock others. And then that just quickly goes in and locks all the other layers. I could do that other ways as well. For example, you can click each one of these, but it's much easier just to drag through those locks. I know that the first time somebody showed me that you could drag through those, I was just like, oh my goodness, why didn't I think that I could drag through those locks before? Oh, I thought I had to click each one of those. Same thing with eyeballs. If you drag through, you can hide a bunch of layers at the same time. Oh, that was such a revelation, I remember. There's all sorts of little tips and tricks like that that you can do. For example, if you option click or on Windows alt click, that's the keystroke version of this, that if you want to lock everything except the thing you're clicking on or unlock, you can option or alt click. So there's many different ways to do these things in Illustrator. Those are just a couple little tips and tricks of how to do those kind of things. Okay, now I have a layer. It's empty. I can't select anything else accidentally. That's good. I'm underneath these swoops that are here. So as I draw, I don't have to be perfect as I'm drawing here. I want to create the blue underneath this area. So I'm going to go in with my pen tool. I'm going to set my fill to be the same blue swatch that we created earlier. And I want to create a straight line across the bottom. So I'm going to click over here, shift click over here to make sure that I'm a perfect straight line across. Shift click here again to stay on that nice 90-degree angle. And then here I could just click, and that works fine because I'm underneath. I'm behind those central swoops because I'm on a layer that's behind it. Then I come here, and then I finally end up on the first point, and I click there. Okay, so I've just drawn that shape by clicking with my pen tool. Okay, so now I've got the color. Now I need the photo to be put on top of that. I'm going to go place the photo in. Again, making sure that I can see the options because I definitely want link to be checked. I always like to verify that. Just click to place it there. I just want to make sure that I don't see any of the horizon line here. I just want to see waves in this area. Like so. Okay. Now, I want to mask. The only thing is that this mask button always assumes that you're doing a rectangle. And a rectangle isn't going to cut it here because that's going to be too high here, too high there, or if I go down here, it's going to cut off there. I can't use my a rectangular mask. I need a custom shaped mask so that I can see just the photo in this area. I don't want it up here. I don't want it down over here. I essentially want it where I drew that blue shape. So if we think about the layers panel and what I just did there, remember underneath I have that blue path. So behind the waves, I have that blue path. So I could select that. Now you can go into the layers panel and click on the little empty area here to the right of an object, and you can select it even though you can't see it in your document. You can still select it even though it's behind something. Or another way you could do it is if I select all the stuff that's on this layer, because remember all the other layers are locked, I can select all. And notice how the waves and the path are selected. I could then just shift click to deselect the waves, and now only the path is selected. Either way would work just fine. And now I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to make sure that I select this object so that I can paste in front of that object. And I could do either paste in front or paste in place. In this case, either one would work just fine. The main thing is that I don't want to just do paste because that's just going to slap it in the middle of my screen. I want to do a paste in front or a paste in place to keep the positioning the same as where I drew it. Now I have the shape, and now I can shift click on the photo so that the shape and the photo are both selected. And now I can create my clipping mask. And the clipping mask clips off or masks off the excess, anything that falls outside of that shape. Now notice I still have my blue path underneath, but now I have the waves limited to just the area that I want them in. Now I can take and select that and I can go to my appearance panel, and I want to make this blend just like I did with the sky that I did up above. Remember that we did the luminosity, and when I choose luminosity, it blends into whatever color is behind it, which is blue. And you might want to play with the opacity as well. Now the cool thing is that now that I can see the unified color scheme that I've got here, I want to go back and remember we've got global colors. If you ever want to make a change, you can double click one of these global colors, check on preview, and every place that you use this, which is the stroke, which is the waves, they update every place. If I go in and want to change the green by double clicking on the green, I can check on preview for that. And now I can change that color everywhere throughout my document. And that's the beauty of these global color swatches and doing all the colorization and everything in Illustrator, is that you don't have to bounce back over to Photoshop to make the color change. You just do it here in Illustrator. All right. So we are almost done. There's really just kind of one last visual thing that we want to create. And for that, we want to do, basically what we want to do next, this is the very last thing we're going to do in this case. We want to draw some little graphic lines, right? Because we're combining vector graphics and pixel-based graphics here. So I want to create some like little wavy lines going across here that are graphic, like waves, right? Now, we actually have a layer for this. It's empty right now. I'm going to lock the blue waves and unlock the wavy lines layer, and we're going to draw on that. This is empty right now. There's nothing on it. And we just have that layer just for the purpose of drawing these wavy lines. Now, this is going to require a little bit of the pen tool to draw this wave. And what we essentially want to do is we want to create a bunch of waves going across. And I'll just kind of quickly do it here with the pencil tool. And you'll see that the pencil tool isn't going to do a very good job of drawing this. But yeah, a little helpful thing popping up there that I don't want to go into right now. So I'll just close that. I essentially want to kind of create a line that's like a very nicely drawn version of this. That is not a very nice, smooth one, but I want to create a nice, evenly reproducible graphic version of this. I'm going to create one of these and then have it reproduce them and repeat them for me so that they're all exactly the same. All right, so I will take my pen tool. Now, let me open up a new file here and give you a quick little intro to the pen tool. It doesn't matter what I have here. This is very brief, but how do you use the pen tool? Well, let me get rid of my fill right now, and let me just concentrate on stroke. There's basically three kinds of points you can make with the pen tool: straight, curved, or cornered. We only want to create curves in this case, but let me go over the straight ones and the curved ones. Click, click, click goes the straight line. So anytime you want to create straight lines, you click. If you shift click, you'll go on a 90 or 45-degree angle if you're holding shift while you click. Okay. But if you ever want to just create straight lines, this is the easiest that the pen tool gets, is just click, click, click. It's like you're playing connect the dots. Click, click. And if you go back to the first one, the final click finishes that, so you can move on to a different shape. If you don't want to finish that line, go to your selection tool, deselect that line, and then when you come in to draw another one, it will be a new line because you deselected the previous line. Straight lines are the easy part. Where it gets a little trickier is the curved lines. This is where nothing in real life prepares you for how Illustrator draws. It's drawing these Bezier or vector curves. And that just takes a bit of time and practice to master. I'll give you some helpful hints though. Imagine in your mind how you want your line to look. And that was a really pitiful drawing there here. This is the line that I want to create. Okay? But a much smoother, nicer version of that. So my line is starting to head up. Then it comes around here in a curve. So think of this as kind of one curve. That's one segment of your line. Now here, if we're turning to the right, if you're on a road, then here you'd start turning to the left. When you start to turn, that's where you put a point. That's the end of one curve and the start of a new curve. So this is two curves. One curve to the right, and then essentially one curve to the left. And if you're not knowing why I'm saying right and left, just imagine you're on this road and you're steering to the right and then you steer to the left. Okay. So the reason it's important to understand where a curve starts and a curve ends is because that's where you're going to put your points. You put a point here and you drag up because the direction is starting to head up, and you let go. Then you come to where that curve ends. You put another point there by clicking and dragging in one motion. Don't let go of the mouse. Drag out these handles. Then let go. Then come to the final point and again drag out more handles. So as you're doing this, the rough rules of thumb are drag in the direction the line is starting to head. Don't drag to where you want to end up. Drag in the direction the line is starting to head. Move away from that handle. Go to the final part where that particular curve ends. Not the whole line, but just that curve. Drag out new handles there. And again, if your line is heading up, drag up. But if your line is heading down, like it currently is, then drag in the direction your line is currently going. And then release. Move away from the handle, go to the end of that curve, and drag in the direction that that curve is currently heading. In this case, it's heading up, so I'm dragging up. If you drag down, see how the difference is. The distance of the handle, the size of that handle, affects the strength of that curve. So a weak little handle is a weak curve. A strong handle, a big handle, is a big curve. Be careful of crossing those direction handles here. If you're a Ghostbusters fan, it's like don't cross the streams. I don't know if you're a Ghostbuster fan. If you are, you'll get that. If not, it's okay. But you don't want to really cross those handles there, and that just doesn't give you nice smooth curves, right? You get kind of funky curves if you cross those handles. If you want nice smooth stuff, make sure your handles don't touch each other. Once you're done, the selection tool lets you move the whole path, and the direct selection tool lets you come back in and move individual points and adjust your handles. And it's all in these handles. What is the angle of the handle and what is the distance of the handle? And of course, where did you put your points? So that's a really rough, quick intro to the pen tool if you didn't know how to use it. We could spend a lot more time and go more in depth than that. But I'm going to drag up a little bit. Then I'm going to drag down a little bit. I don't want very big waves. I don't want super big waves here. I just want very subtle ones. So that's why I'm not dragging straight up and down. I'm giving just a little bit of an angle here, like so. So it's a very subtle, just a little bit of a wave there. Okay. Now, maybe I want to make that a little bit smaller, so I just resize that like so. I'm putting this up here at the top left so that I can repeat it going across. Now, you could do this in different ways. You can make patterns, and that's one way you could do this. We're going to do this using a live effect because I don't need a pattern which I can use to fill an object, because this doesn't need to be a filled object. I just want to live preview how far apart everything is, and I want to be able to play around with that. And I think it's easiest to do this as an effect. So what we can do is we can go to our path, and I'm going to make sure that the path is selected, and we're going to add a transform effect here under distort and transform. Now, transform means to move, scale, skew, that type of stuff. And so we're going to do this to copies. So we're going to virtually make copies instead of actually directly making copies. Why? Because if we update the first one, all of these virtual copies will all update. So I'm going to go to transform, check on preview. Now we're going to make it move. Okay, so notice you can move that. Cool. Now, as far as how far I should move it over, I should move it exactly one width of my original element. So I should actually cancel this. I should pay attention to the size. So I'm going to go to my transform panel here. Depending on your size screen, you might see this automatically expanded up here. I'm a little bit of a smaller screen, so I don't have it automatically expanded. I got to bring it up here. And the width of this is, let's just make this even, just so it's easier to type. 73 points. So 73 points. Also notice the height is, let's just say, 12 points. So 73 by 12. 73 wide, 12 tall. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do my transform. And I'm going to move it over 73 points. So it's exactly moved over one increment of my wave. But I want to move multiple copies. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to hit my up arrow, up arrow, up arrow. Each time I hit my up arrow, or of course I could type in a number, I get another copy. And so we're virtually creating copies. Cool. Now what's interesting is you could have these rotate while you're doing that. You could have them scale while you're doing that so they keep getting smaller. You could do all sorts of cool stuff here. We don't want to do that for this. We just want to move it over and that's it. Now I can't move them down at the same time because it would move over and down for each one of these. In this particular effect, I can only move them over, and then I'll have to add another effect to then take this whole thing and then repeat that over and over again to create my additional rows that I want to make. All right, so I'm going to click OK. Now, I was very lucky that this actually ended up looking pretty good, but you might not have this lined up quite as well. It's not perfect here. Let's edit this. I'm going to use my direct selection tool to go into this last point. It's possible that your anchor points might not be lining up. So to fix that, what you can do is you can select this point, shift click the other point so that both the start and the end are selected, and then you can average them out. You can say object, path, average the distance between the two. On a vertical plane, I want to average them. So they're going to both come to the same vertical plane. They're basically going to kind of align to the center of each other. Oops, sorry. Often in my mind, I screw that up. I don't want them to be on the same vertical axis. I want them to be on the same horizontal axis. I'm going to shift click to select both of those and go back in there and do it again. Object, path, average. Yeah, I want them to be on the same horizontal axis, right? A horizontal axis goes across. There. Now you can still do it using that average. That's been around for a long time. In more recent versions of Illustrator, you can finally align points to each other. And this is now how I typically do it, just because a lot of times with that average feature, like I just did in front of you guys, my mind just forgets which one I want to do. And I like to just visually see, oh, I want to put the tops to each other, or I want to put the bottoms to each other, or center them with each other. But this works on points. Years ago, in older versions of Illustrator, it didn't work on points. It only did paths. Now it works on points as well. Then I can take the shape of this and I can change it so that it looks like it's merging in nicely. And it's a combination of the start and the end lining up. So you have to decide how you want the shape to be and get them to line up nicely with each other. But you can get something that looks pretty smooth like that. Then I'm going to select this again. I have the one transform effect, which gets me across, but now I want another one that gets me rows going down. So I'm going to go back in, do another one of these. Now, Illustrator confirms, do you want to do a second effect? Because unfortunately, what a lot of people did is they didn't know that you could edit the effect. They thought that if you kept going back into the menu that it would edit the current one. And so I've seen files where sometimes people have like 10 different drop shadows on there because they just thought they were editing the current one rather than adding a new one. So they added this thing to just say, hey, you know, when you're doing this, you're adding an effect rather than editing. So they actually tell you, hey, you know, if you want to edit, go and double click the name of the one that you have now. But in this case, I actually want to apply another effect. This time I'm going to go down and make copies. So I'm going to vertically move it down. If you remember, my thing was about 12 points, so I want to go 12 points plus a little bit extra. And I want copies. Up arrow, up arrow, up arrow. You can type in amounts, but you can also just hit the up arrow a couple times until you get enough of those. Cool. So now I have this nice little field of graphic waves. And the beauty of this is that if I go to the first one, and it's really only the first one, because if I switch over to outline view, Notice that it's only the first one that's actually there. The rest of them are all virtual copies. But if I update this first one, they all change instantly because they're all live copies of this first version. So that's pretty awesome. To make this effect a little bit more subtle, what I want to do is have it start out being completely visible on the left, but to slowly fade out as it moves to the right. So I want it to fade into eventually 0% opacity so you can't see it. But I want it to fade away. I don't want it to be cut off like the clipping mask that we made earlier. I want it to fade away slowly, and that requires an opacity mask. So clipping masks in Illustrator are going to literally show things or not. There's not an opacity to it. But an opacity mask lets you control the opacity using light and dark. So we need a shape that has variable light and dark to it. So within this shape, and I'm going to go to my fill here, and down below I'm going to choose gradient to apply a gradient. I want to go from white to black. Now it just happens to go to the exact right gradient that I wanted, which is really nice, very lucky. If it didn't though, what you could do here, maybe you have some extra points or something and you need to get a nice black and white gradient. If there's extra little points here that you don't need, just drag them off. You want one at the start and the end, and you want to double click on the one on the left and make that white. And the one on the right, you want to double click on that one and make that one black. The reason is because white means visible and black means invisible to layer masks. And this is true in Illustrator and in Photoshop. And an easy way to remember that is when you walk into a pitch black room, you can see nothing. And when you shine a white flashlight on something, you can see it. So white is the flashlight illuminating your object so you can see it, and black is the darkness that hides it so you can't see it. If you can't even remember that, you have a 50-50 shot. It's white or it's black. If you get it wrong, you can always swap your gradient around. There's always a flip button. Just hit the reverse button and you get it right. So don't worry too much. I'm going to shift click to select the lines behind. Even though these aren't technically speaking there, you still can click on it and it does select that shape. Then I go to my transparency panel, and you can add an opacity mask using the little menu right here. Boom. It used my gradient shape and the colors of that gradient shape, the lightness and darkness, the white to the black, to define the opacity. So white is visible, black is invisible. If I then go to the mask, I can actually edit it. I can make that shape wider or narrower. If I go to my gradient tool, I could pull in the white end over here and change where it's actually fading in and out. So I can make it have more visibility over here, and then the fade starts further over, like so. I could also rotate that if I want to do it like that. I could have it visible on the top and then fade out as it goes down. It all just depends on the effect that I'm going for here. I want to undo that a couple times to go back to here. When you're done though, always make sure that you leave the mask and come back into your document, because, for example, if you look in your layers, you're now stuck in the opacity mask. And I see people trying to unlock their layers and do stuff, and they're like, where am I? It's like I'm in some other world. I can't select anything. I can't see it. Where am I? You're in the layer mask, and you want to get out of the layer mask. So make sure you click on this, which goes back to your art. I know you don't see a preview there because it's white on a white background, but if you had other art, you'd actually see the art there. And then you're back in your document, and you're out of the mask. So don't get stuck in masks. Come back into your document by clicking on this. So those are the techniques we wanted to show. The very last thing I want to mention is about embedding your art into your document. The way that I save this file is that the links are still links. But what if you want to save a print version to send out to somebody and you want to embed the artwork? This is especially important if you're going to place this into Adobe InDesign, because when InDesign collects its links, it will only collect the Illustrator file it will not look into the Illustrator file and see that it is further linked to the images. And that's going to be a problem when things end up printing. So we can save a copy. And then I'm going to say dash print, or whatever it is. You know, if this is just the file that you're going to send to somebody with everything embedded. And when you're saving this, you can check on include linked files. Now, I hate the name of this thing because it really should say embed linked files. Because include linked files, it's kind of not very obvious. Is it going to keep them as links or not keep them as links? Like, yeah, I'd want to include my linked files. When you say embed linked files, this makes much more sense. That will embed them, so they're not going to be links anymore. If you uncheck it, they will stay links, so it won't include them. It won't embed them into the document. They're going to remain links. So my editing file, I want this to be unchecked, because if it's unchecked, they stay links. I keep a small file size, and it's easy to edit back in Photoshop. But when I want to send it out to somebody and I want to send them one file with everything embedded, that will embed the linked files, so I have a single file to send, and I don't have to worry about those pixel-based graphics. They're embedded into this document. And one of the ways that I can prove that to you is on my desktop here. If we look at the file size, notice that the original document is only 2.8 megs, and the print one is 5 megs. And if you look at the file size of these two things, that's about, not quite, but about what it added to the file size. And so this has those graphics embedded. They're no longer linked. Okay. So just a little wrap up here. Don't forget that on our website we have this special goodies page. You have to know this address. It's in the video description down below. If you're here in the live stream, I just pasted it into the chat again. Just scroll down here to the bottom. If you want to go through this with a step-by-step written exercise, in case there was anything you forgot, we've written the instructions down here. You can download those. You get the class files and the instructions. And if you like going through instructions like this, you like learning this way, you're going to love our workbooks as well. This is kind of the same approach that we take for our workbooks, and you can check those out. We sell workbooks on tons of different topics, from web design to Adobe apps to video editing with After Effects. Those are great. You can buy those as ebook or print versions. And if you get the ebook, you get a downloadable PDF that if you want to print it yourself, you can. But you also get access to an EPUB, which you can load onto any e-reader. Or if you have a Kindle, you get a Mobi file to load onto a Kindle device. And like I said, we also have classes in a variety of these topics as well. And most of them you can attend in person in New York City, as well as live online. If you like this video, please click the thumbs up that you like it. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel in case you want to get notifications of future videos that we post. I'm going to give a moment here in case anybody has any questions in the live stream chat. Oh, somebody's asking how can it already be in the goodies. Well, those are just the instructions. We wrote the instructions down ahead of time. We like to prep. The videos, this particular video, we'll post it to our channel probably early next week. We'll do a little bit of editing and prep it and get it ready. And then anybody that's attending the live stream live, we'll send you an email with the link. We also post links as well to any past seminars on our free seminars page. But you can also find these on our YouTube channel here on YouTube. All right, so it doesn't look like there's any other questions in the chat, so just want to say thanks for coming, everybody. If you like the video, please click the thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hope to see you in a future seminar or a class. And thanks for coming, everybody. Hope you enjoyed.